The last survivor, the sky was red and heavy with smoke. Ash fell like slow snow over the ruins of the alien city. Buildings that once touched the clouds now lay broken, their walls black with fire. The streets were empty except for one figure. Young alien girl, her skin pale as moonlight, her silver hair tangled with dust. She walked barefoot over cracked stone, holding a small metal pendant close to her chest. Her eyes, once bright, were now dull with hunger and fear. Every sound made her flinch, every shadow made her heart race. Her people were gone, taken or killed in the war. Now she was the only one left. She had not eaten for 2 days. The water in her pouch was gone. Still, she walked, because to stop would mean to die. Above her, the distant roar of engines made her freeze. She darted under the remains of a stone arch, hiding like a cornered animal. A black human patrol ship passed overhead. Her breathing quickened. The stories she had been told since childhood came back to her, stories of humans, ruthless and cruel. Her elders had said that if they found you, they would take everything you had, even your life. So she stayed low, not moving until the ship was gone. When the air was quiet again, she stepped out slowly. The sun was already falling, shadows growing long and sharp. If night came before she found shelter, the wild creatures of the wasteland would find her first. She kept moving, ignoring the pain in her legs. But then she heard a crunch behind her. Someone was there. She turned and saw a human man in dusty armor. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a weapon slung across his back. His face was hidden under a helmet, but his voice was clear. "Wait," he called. She didn't wait. She ran. Her feet slipped on loose stones. Her breath came in sharp gasps. She didn't look back, but she could hear his boots hitting the ground behind her. Her body was weak, her steps slower than she wanted. The world spun, and before she could stop it, her knees gave way. The ground rushed up. A darkness swallowed her when she opened her eyes again. She was not lying on the street. She was inside a tent. Warm light flickering from a small heater. Her head rested on a folded blanket. She sat up fast, her hands reaching for the pendant still there. "Easy." The human's voice came again. Softer this time. He stepped into view. Removing his helmet, his hair was dark and messy, his face marked with dirt and old scars. He knelt down, holding out a canteen of water. "Drink," he said. She stared at it, her throat burning with thirst. But she remembered the stories. She shook her head, pushing the canteen away. The man sighed, placing it on the floor beside her. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. She didn't believe him. Humans didn't help aliens. That was the way the universe worked toward, so she had been told. She kept her eyes on him, ready to run when she found a chance. Outside, the wind howled through the ruins. She could hear the crackle of the heater, smell the faint scent of cooked food. Her stomach twisted painfully. But she didn't move closer. The man turned away, busying himself with something in a small metal pot. She used that moment to scan the tent for an exit. There was one flap at the back, partly open. She moved silently, her bare feet making no sound. The night air cut cold against her skin as she slipped outside. She had taken only 3 steps when a voice spoke behind her. "You'll freeze out there." She spun around, heart pounding. The man stood in the doorway, not angry, not shouting. Instead, he held out a blanket. She didn't take it. Her body trembled from the cold, but her pride kept her still. He stepped closer, slow, as if not to scare her. Then, without asking, he wrapped the blanket around her shoulders. The warmth sank in, making her knees weak. For a moment, she didn't move, just stood there staring at him. Why hadn't he stopped her with force, or tied her up, or taken her things? She lowered her eyes, unsure of what to say. The stories of her people had painted humans as monsters. Yet here was one offering her warmth without demand. Still, she kept her guard. Kindness could be a trick. But a small spark of doubt began to grow inside her, doubt about the stories she had always believed. The man's voice was calm when he spoke again. "My name's Daniel," he said. "You're safe here, for now." She said nothing, but deep inside, she felt the first fragile thread of something she had not felt in many days: hope. The fear of humans. The night passed slowly. The alien girl lay on the blanket in the corner of the tent, her eyes half closed, but never truly asleep. Every small sound made her tense: the hum of the heater, the shifting of boots, the faint clink of metal as the human prepared his gear. She didn't trust him. She couldn't. Her people had told her stories, and those stories had shaped her life. Humans were dangerous, they said. They would smile as they took what they wanted. They would show kindness only to hide a knife in their other hand. And now, here she was, in a human's tent, with no way to escape the cold if she left. Daniel sat on the other side, leaning against a crate. He wasn't watching her, but she knew he was aware of her every move. His weapon rested within easy reach. The firelight made his face look older than it was. When their eyes met, he didn't speak. He just gave a small nod, as if telling her she could rest. She turned away, pulling the blanket tighter. The warmth from the fabric was a strange comfort. It made her remember nights in her village when her mother wrapped her in furs. She pushed the memory away quickly because it hurt too much. She had no family now, and this human was not her friend. In the middle of the night, she heard soft movement. Her eyes opened instantly. Daniel was stirring the pot over the heater. The smell of food filled the tent, a smell so good it made her stomach ache. She looked away, not wanting him to see the hunger in her face. Without a word, he poured some into a metal bowl and set it in front of her. She didn't move. He sat back down, eating from his own bowl. No pressure, no demand, just silence. The steam from the food rose between them. Her throat burned from thirst. Her stomach knotted in pain. But still, she didn't touch it. She told herself it could be poisoned. It could be a trick if she ate it. Maybe she'd fall asleep and never wake up. So she sat there, staring at it. Minutes passed, the heat fading from the food. Finally, Daniel set his bowl down and spoke. "You're not going to eat, are you?" She didn't answer. He let out a quiet sigh. "I don't know what they told you about humans, but I'm not here to hurt you," he said. His voice was calm, without anger. That made it harder to hate him, and she didn't like that feeling. When the first light of morning came, the wind outside was sharp and cold. Daniel packed his gear and looked at her. "We need to move," he said. She stayed where she was. "I'm taking you to a safer place," he added. Still, she hesitated. Safe? What did that even mean now? He stepped outside and began walking. For a long moment, she thought about staying behind. But the thought of the empty city and the night creatures made her shiver. With a reluctant sigh, she followed him, keeping several steps behind. The world outside was gray and dead. Burned-out shells of buildings loomed over cracked streets. Their shadows felt like the hands of ghosts reaching for her. Every time Daniel glanced back, she looked away quickly. She didn't want him to think she needed him. Hours passed, and the cold bit through her thin clothes. Her feet ached, but she didn't complain. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of knowing she was weak. But when a gust of icy wind made her stumble, he stopped. Without a word, he took off his scarf and held it out. She stared at it. "It's just cloth," he said, "not poison." Her jaw tightened. But she took it and wrapped it around her neck. The warmth spread quickly, and she hated how good it felt. Later, as they crossed a ruined marketplace, a shadow moved ahead. Daniel's hand went to his weapon instantly. He signaled for her to stay back. Two ragged figures appeared from behind an overturned cart. Their eyes were sharp, their hands empty, but tense. "Travelers," one said with a grin. "We like travelers." The other man stepped closer, his eyes locking on her. She froze, her heartbeat pounding in her ears before they could take another step. Daniel stood between them and her. "Keep walking," he said, his tone like cold steel. The men hesitated, muttered curses, then slipped back into the shadows. Daniel turned, his expression unreadable. "Stay close," he said. She followed without thinking, and for the first time, she realized something she had been afraid of. Him since the moment they met, but in that moment she was more afraid of the world without him in it. That night, they camped in the shell of an old shop. Daniel set up the heater again, and without asking, placed food and water beside her. This time, she didn't push it away. She took a small sip, then a small bite. The taste was simple, but warm. She kept her eyes down, but she knew he had noticed. For some reason, he didn't say anything, and she was grateful for that, as she lay down that night. Her mind was restless. She still didn't trust him, not fully, but something had shifted. The stories of her people had told her humans could never be trusted. And yet, she was still alive. And it was because of him. Asterisk. The cold March the morning was colder than the night before. A thick layer of frost covered the broken streets, turning every step into a crunch. The wind carried sharp blades of ice that cut against the skin. The alien girl pulled the scarf tighter around her neck, but the cold still reached her bones. Daniel walked ahead, steady and silent. His boots left deep marks in the frozen dust. He had said the human camp was still far, but it was the only place with food and shelter. She didn't want to go there, but she wanted to freeze even less. The world around them was empty. No animals, no voices, only the sound of the wind. Sometimes she thought she heard footsteps behind them, but when she looked back, there was nothing. Daniel's head turned often, scanning the ruins with careful eyes. He didn't speak, but she could tell he was watching for danger. Hours passed. Her feet felt like stones, heavy and numb. She stumbled more than once, and each time Daniel slowed his pace so she could catch up. She hated that he noticed her weakness, but she hated the thought of being left behind more. By midday, clouds rolled in, covering the pale sun. Snow began to fall, not gentle snow, but thick, heavy flakes that stuck to her hair and clothes. The road became harder to see. Daniel stopped and pulled something from his pack. It was a thick outer coat, worn and patched. Without a word, he held it out to her. She looked at it, then at him. "I'm fine," she muttered, her voice low. He didn't move, still holding it toward her. "You're shaking," he said, reluctantly. She took it, slipping it over her thin frame. The warmth wrapped around her like a shield, and she hated how good it felt. They kept walking, the snow falling heavier. The city ruins ended, giving way to a wide stretch of open wasteland. The wind was worse. Here, with no walls to block it, her hands went numb. Her breath turned into clouds before her face. Each step was harder than the last. By late afternoon, her legs refused to listen. Her vision blurred, and the ground tilted under her. She collapsed into the snow without meaning to. Daniel was at her side in an instant. "Hey," he said, shaking her shoulder gently. "Stay awake." She mumbled something, but even she couldn't hear it. The cold had seeped into her bones, making her limbs heavy as stone. Daniel knelt, checking her hands. They were like ice. Without hesitation, he lifted her into his arms. She tried to protest, but no sound came out. The world swayed as he carried her. His chest was warm against her cheek, and the steady rhythm of his steps became the only thing she could feel. The wind still roared, but it felt farther away now. Her eyes closed, though she fought to keep them open. He spoke to her as he walked, his voice a steady anchor in the cold. "Almost there," he said. "Just hold on." She didn't know if he meant a building, a camp, or just safety from the snow. But his tone made her believe him, even if she didn't want to. They reached a small cluster of ruins, half-collapsed stone walls with a roof still standing. Daniel carried her inside, setting her down in a corner. The wind was muffled here. The air still icy, but not cutting like outside. He pulled off his gloves, his hands red from the cold, and began setting up the small heater from his pack. A weak flame flickered to life, filling the space with faint warmth. Daniel knelt beside her again. Wrapping the blanket around her tighter, her eyes met his, and for a moment, she forgot to look away. His gaze wasn't pity, was determination. The same look she imagined someone might have for family. She wanted to say thank you, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she clutched the pendant at her neck. It was the last piece of her old life. But as the warmth from the heater slowly spread through her fingers, she realized something. This human, this stranger, was now the reason she was still breathing. Night fell outside, the snow still coming down in heavy waves. Daniel gave her a small cup of warm water. She drank it slowly, feeling life creep back into her. He leaned back against the wall, his rifle close, his eyes half closed, but never truly resting. The firelight danced over his face for the first time. She noticed he looked tired, not just from the march, but from something deeper. Maybe he carried his own ghosts, just as she did. She wondered if he had anyone waiting for him. The thought made her chest ache in a way she didn't understand. When she finally lay down to sleep, she didn't face the wall as she had before. Instead, she kept her eyes where she could still see him. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was something close. And in the silence of the ruined shelter, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, they would make it through tomorrow. The raiders' attack the morning was quiet. Too quiet. The snow had stopped falling. But the sky stayed gray and heavy. Daniel moved carefully through the ruins. Scanning every shadow, the alien girl followed a few steps behind. Her borrowed coat and scarf still wrapped tightly around her. The world looked calm, but she could feel something in the air, a tension. Her people had always said that before danger comes, the wind feels different, and this wind felt sharp, as if carrying a warning. She kept her hand near the pendant. At her neck, holding it for comfort, they were crossing what had once been a wide street when Daniel froze. His hand went up, signaling her to stop. She did, her breath misting in the cold air. Then she heard two soft crunches in the snow. But not from their own steps. Shadows moved at the edges of the buildings before she could ask what was wrong. Figures stepped out from both sides, 5 of them wearing mismatched armor and carrying weapons that looked stolen. Their faces were hard and hungry. "Travelers," one of them said with a grin. "Looks like we found something worth taking." The girl's stomach twisted. She had seen raiders before. They took supplies, prisoners, anything they wanted. The leader's eyes slid over Daniel, then locked on her. She fetched a good price, he said to the others. Her chest went cold. Daniel stepped forward, placing himself between her and the raiders. "Not happening," he said, his voice flat and cold. The raiders laughed. "You alone against all of us." The leader mocked. Daniel's hand rested on his weapon, steady and sure. The standoff lasted only a moment before one of the raiders lunged. Daniel moved fast, shoving the girl back behind him as the first shot rang out. Snow sprayed into the air as the fight exploded. The girl pressed herself against a broken wall, her heart pounding like a drum. She saw Daniel fire, the flash of his weapon bright against the gray day. A raider fell, but the others kept coming. One circled around, trying to reach her. Fear surged through her chest. She grabbed a loose piece of stone and swung it wildly, hitting the man's shoulder. He snarled and grabbed her wrist, pulling hard. Pain shot up her arm. But before he could drag her away, Daniel was there. He slammed into the man, knocking him into the snow. "Stay behind me," Daniel shouted, not looking back at her. Another raider charged. Daniel took a hit to his arm. Stumbling but not falling, blood darkened the sleeve of his coat, but he kept fighting. The girl's breath caught he was hurt, but even bleeding. He didn't let them near her. She spotted a fallen weapon in the snow, a short blade. Her hands shook as she picked it up. Her people had taught her to fear fighting, to run instead. But running now would mean leaving him, and she couldn't do that. When another raider tried to rush Daniel from the side, she stepped forward. Her grip was clumsy. But she slashed at the man's arm. He cursed and stumbled back, giving Daniel the opening to finish the fight, the sound of the last body hitting. The snow was followed by heavy silence. The girl's chest rose and fell quickly, her hands still trembling around the blade. Daniel turned to her, his breathing hard. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, though she wasn't sure it was true. Her ears rang, her body felt light, and her heart was still racing. Daniel looked down at his arm, blood soaking through the fabric. Without thinking, she stepped closer. "Let me see," she said, her voice low but steady. He didn't argue, just sat down in the snow. She tore a strip from the inside of her coat's lining and wrapped it around his arm, tightening it to slow the bleeding. Their eyes met for a brief moment. "Thanks," he said simply. She looked away quickly, afraid he might see the strange warmth growing in her chest. The fight had shaken her, but something else had happened. Too, she had stood between him and danger, even if only for a moment, when they finally moved on. The snow under their feet was marked with the signs of the battle. The cold wind returned, but she didn't feel it as much. Her thoughts were. On the way, Daniel had thrown himself into the fight without hesitation. No one had ever done that for her before, not even among her own people as they walked. She found herself watching him differently. Yes, he was human, and yes, she still didn't fully trust him. But after today, she couldn't see him as the monster her stories had warned about. He was something else, something far more dangerous and far more rare. He was someone who would bleed for her that night when they stopped to rest. She didn't sit as far away as before. She stayed closer to the fire, closer to him. Neither of them spoke much. But the silence felt different now. It was not the silence of strangers, it was the silence of people who had fought side by side and lived. The night by the fire night fell heavy and fast. The wind howled outside their small shelter, carrying the distant echoes of things moving in the darkness. Daniel had chosen an old storage hut, its roof still mostly whole, its walls thick enough to block the worst of the cold inside. The air was damp but still warmer than the open snow. The girl sat near the small heater, her hands outstretched to catch the fragile warmth. The firelight flickered over her face, making her silver hair shine softly. Daniel sat across from her, his arm bandaged from the earlier fight. The cloth was already spotted with red. But he didn't complain. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The crackle of the heater and the soft moan of the wind were the only sounds. The girl kept her eyes on the flames, but she could feel his gaze on her from time to time. She wasn't sure if it made her uneasy or safe. Finally, she broke the silence. "You're hurt," she said quietly. Daniel glanced at his arm, then shrugged. "I've had worse," he replied, his voice calm. She frowned, wondering how many times he had been close to death before. She reached into her coat, pulling out the small pendant she always carried. It was dull now, its edges worn smooth by years of touch. "This belonged to my mother," she said, her tone flat but her fingers tight around it. "She gave it to me. Before I was alone." Daniel didn't interrupt. She was glad, for that tid made it easier to speak. She said, "As long as I kept it, I'd find my way home." The girl continued, her voice trembling slightly. Her eyes lifted to the ruined walls around them, "But there's no home to go back to now." Daniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I lost my home too," he said. My family was in one of the cities that fell in the first year of the war." The words were simple, but the weight behind them was heavy. She looked at him and saw not just a soldier, but someone who knew what it felt like to have nothing left. The fire crackled between them for a moment. They were not human and alien, not soldier and survivor. They were just two people sitting in the cold, holding on to what little they had left. She felt something in her chest shift. It was not trust not yet, but it was the beginning of understanding. Daniel pulled a small packet from his pack and tossed it toward her. She caught it clumsily and opened it. Finding dried fruit inside, her stomach growled softly, and she ate slowly, savoring every bite. "You'll need your strength," he said. She nodded. The warmth from the food spreading through her in a way the fire never could. The night grew colder. The heater's flame was small, barely enough to keep the chill from biting too deep. Daniel pulled his blanket tighter around himself, then looked at her. "You're still cold," he said, more as a statement than a question. She hesitated, then gave a small nod. Without a word, he moved closer. He draped half his blanket over her shoulders, the other half still around him. The sudden closeness made her tense, but the heat from his body was undeniable. For a moment, neither of them moved, then slowly. Her shoulders relaxed. She glanced at him from the corner of her eye. His gaze was fixed on the fire, his expression unreadable. But the steady rise and fall of his breathing was strangely calming. It reminded her of nights long ago, when she had fallen asleep beside her mother, safe under warm furs outside. Something howled in the distance. She flinched, her hand instinctively gripping the edge of the blanket. Daniel didn't react much. Just glanced toward the sound. "They won't." "Come near while we have a fire," he said, his tone steady. The certainty in his voice made her believe him. Minutes stretched into an hour. The heat from the blanket, the quiet hum of the heater, and the steady presence beside her began to wash away the edge of fear. Her eyelids grew heavy, but before sleep could take her, she spoke softly, almost too soft for him to hear. "Why?" Daniel turned his head slightly. "Why what?" he asked. She swallowed, her voice still quiet. "Why are you helping me?" There was no accusation in her tone, only honest confusion. He was silent for a moment, staring into the fire. Finally, he said, "Because I can." It wasn't the answer she expected. It wasn't the grand reason she thought she might hear. But somehow, it was enough. She closed her eyes then, the weight of exhaustion finally pulling her under. The last thing she felt was the steady warmth of the blanket and the quiet, unshakable presence of the man beside her, and for the first time since her world had fallen apart, she slept without fear. The dangerous crossing the next morning, the wind had calmed. The world outside the hut was pale and silent, snow stretching endlessly in every direction. Daniel packed their supplies quickly, his movements sharp and efficient. The girl wrapped her coat and scarf tight. Following him without a word, they walked for hours, the air biting at their faces. The sun was weak, barely more than a pale circle in the sky. The girl's breath came in soft clouds, and each step crunched in the snow. She had grown used to the rhythm of their travel walk. Rest, watch for danger, but that day felt different. By midday, they reached the edge of a deep ravine. At the bottom, a river roared, black water churning with jagged ice. Across the gap, she could see the remains of a bridge, its wooden planks broken and hanging loose. Only a narrow, unstable path of ropes and cracked boards remained, swaying in the cold wind. Daniel studied it for a long moment. "It's the only way," he said finally. Her stomach tightened. One wrong step and they would fall into the freezing water. The current was strong enough to drag anyone under in seconds. Daniel pulled a rope from his pack. He tied one end around his own waist, the other around hers. Her eyes widened. "What is this for?" she asked quietly. "So you don't fall," he said, his tone steady. She stood at the edge. Staring at the swaying boards, the drop felt endless. The river below, like the open mouth of some dark creature. Daniel stepped onto the bridge first, testing each plank before putting his full weight on it. "Hold on to the rope, keep your eyes on me, and move slowly," he instructed. Her hands gripped the rope so tight her knuckles went pale. She stepped onto the first board. It groaned under her weight. The wind whistled through the ravine, pushing against her balance. She forced herself to keep her eyes on Daniel's back. Taking one small step at a time, halfway across, the bridge gave a loud creak. One of the boards snapped under Daniel's boot, sending splinters into the air. He caught himself quickly. Shifting his weight to the ropes, "Keep going," he said. His voice calm but urgent. She moved forward, her heart pounding so loud she could barely hear the river. Another gust of wind rocked the bridge, and her foot slipped. Her body tilted sideways, and the world spun. A cry escaped her lips as she felt herself falling. The rope went tight, pulling. Hard at her waist, Daniel's grip on the main rope held firm, his muscles straining as he pulled her back onto the boards. "Hold on," he shouted. Her hands scrambled for the ropes, her breath coming in fast bursts. She clung to them like her life depended on it, because it did. When she was steady again, Daniel didn't let go until she nodded. They moved slower after that. Every step a careful test. Finally, after what felt like hours, they reached the other side. The girl's legs were shaking so badly she could barely stand. Daniel untied the rope and crouched to look her in the eye. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, though her voice was shaky when she said, "I almost fell, but you didn't." He replied, "Because I was here." His words sank deep. She realized he had tied the rope not just to keep her from falling, but to make sure if she went down, he would go too. He had trusted her life to his own. The thought made her chest feel warm in a way the cold couldn't touch. They rested near a cluster of frozen trees. Daniel shared the last of their dried fruit, handing her the larger piece without hesitation. She didn't protest this time, just ate quietly. Her eyes on him. The bridge had been dangerous, too dangerous, but he had faced it without hesitation. As the sun dipped lower, painting the snow with faint gold, she caught herself glancing at him more often, not because she feared him, but because she found comfort in knowing he was there. The fear she had felt for him in the beginning seemed so far away now. She still didn't know where this road would take them, but she knew she didn't want to walk it without him. That night, as they camped beneath the trees, the river's roar now distant, she lay awake for a while. Her fingers brushed the pendant at her neck. Her mother's words came back to her about finding her way home. She had thought home meant a place, a village, a family of her own kind. But as she looked at Daniel's sleeping form beside the fire, she began to wonder if maybe it could mean something else. Home in his arms the morning after the crossing was calm. The wind was gentle. The air cold but not cutting. Snow glittered under the pale sunlight for the first time in days. The world seemed quiet, almost peaceful. Daniel led the way through the frost-covered forest. The girl followed close, her steps lighter than before. She no longer kept the distance she once had. Sometimes their shoulders brushed as they walked, and she didn't pull away. By midday, they reached a ridge. Beyond it, the valley opened wide. In the distance, she saw something she had almost stopped believing in a camp. Tents stood in neat rows, smoke rising from chimneys. Figures moved about, busy with their work. "That's it," Daniel said, nodding toward the camp. Her stomach tightened. This was the place he had been taking her to. She should have felt relief, but instead, an unexpected fear settled in her chest. What if they took her away from him as they walked down toward the camp? A pair of armed guards stepped forward. They were human, their faces stern and eyes sharp. Daniel greeted them with a short nod, found her in the ruins. He said simply. The guards exchanged a look. Then one of them said, "She need to be processed." Processed. The word made her skin crawl. Daniel's jaw tightened. "She's under my protection," he said firmly. The guard frowned. "Orders are—" "I don't care about orders," Daniel interrupted, his tone like steel. "She stays with me." The girl stood frozen in room. All her life, no one had ever spoken for her like that. No one had ever refused to give her up. The guards hesitated, then stepped aside. Daniel led her into the camp without another word. Inside, the camp was loud and full of movement. Humans worked on machines, carried supplies, shouted orders. The smell of cooked food hung in the air, making her stomach growl softly. Daniel noticed and gave her a faint smile. "Come on," he said, guiding her toward a quieter area. They reached a small tent at the far end of the camp. Inside, it was a simpler cot, a small table, and a heater. Daniel set down his pack, then looked at her. "You can rest here," he said. She stepped inside slowly, her eyes moving over every corner. It wasn't much, but it was warm, it was safe. And Daniel was there. For the first time since her world ended, she let herself breathe deeply. The tension in her chest eased. She sat on the cot, the blanket still. Wrapped around her shoulders, Daniel poured her a cup of warm tea from a metal flask. She took it with both hands, the heat sinking into her fingers. "Thank you," she said softly. Her voice barely carried over the quiet hum of the heater. Daniel sat across from her, his tired eyes meeting hers. "You've been through a lot," he said. She looked down at her tea. "I thought I had no one left." She admitted. "Maybe you don't," he said, "but you're not alone anymore." The words settled deep in her. She had clung to the pendant for days, believing it was her only connection to her old life. But now she realized something her mother had told her: it would lead her home. She had imagined home as walls and roofs, as her own people's voices. But now, sitting in the quiet with Daniel's presence steady beside her, she understood. Home could be a person. The day passed slowly, outside. The camp went about its work, but she stayed in the tent. Daniel left only once to bring her food, returning quickly when night fell. The cold crept in again. The small heater glowed, but the air still held a chill. Daniel noticed her shivering and sighed. "Come here," he said gently. She hesitated, then stood. He pulled the blanket wider, letting her sit beside him on the cot. The warmth from his body chased away the cold almost instantly. At first, she sat stiffly, unsure how close she should be. But when the wind outside howled and she flinched, Daniel's arm came around her. It was not rough or demanding, it was steady, strong and certain. Her body relaxed without her meaning to. Her head rested lightly against his shoulder. The silence between them was not empty. It was full of everything. They had been through the ruins, the snow, the bridge, the fight, every step of the way. He had been there, every danger, every cold night, every moment she thought she wouldn't make it. He had made sure she did. Her fingers curled into the edge of his sleeve, she whispered, with no one left. "I still have you." Daniel didn't answer with words. He just pulled her closer. His arm a wall of safety around her. The sound of the wind faded, and the world felt small and warm that night. She didn't dream of the war or the ruins. She dreamed of walking forward, always forward, with someone beside her who would never let her fall, and when she woke, still wrapped in the safety of his arms. She knew something without doubt. She had found her home.